my pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's reading and curated conversation with Juliette Aristides. On this International Day of Peace, it feels especially meaningful to gather together around art and reflection, a reminder that creativity can be both a personal practice and a shared experience, creating space for understanding, empathy, and new ways of seeing. We would like to begin with the words of Chief Seattle. Every part of this soil is sacred in the estimation of my people. Every hillside, every valley, every plain and grove has been hallowed by some sad or happy event in days long vanished. Let us now acknowledge that the land on which we gather is within the ancestral territory of the Suquamish, people of clear salt water, the Suquamish people. Expert fishermen, canoe builders, and basket weavers, the Suquamish live in harmony with the lands and waters along Washington's Central Salish Sea as they have for thousands of years. Here, the Suquamish live and protect the land as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. So Juliette Aristides is a nationally recognized artist, educator, and author whose work bridges the classical tradition with contemporary life. She's the founder of the Aristides Atelier at Gage Academy of Art in Seattle, where she guided artists through rigorous training in drawing and painting for over 20 years. Juliette currently teaches workshops both nationally and internationally and founded the Aristides Atelier online. She's also the author of several influential books on art education, including The Classical Drawing Atelier, Lessons in Classical Painting, and most recently, The Inner Life of the Artist, which reflects deeply on creativity, perception, and the role of art in our daily lives. Her writing and teaching remind us that art is not only a practice of skill, but also a way of seeing and being in the world. Today, Juliette will share selections from her newest book, followed by a conversation with me here on stage. There will be time for audience questions as well, and then we'll head out to the bistro for a reception where Juliette will sign copies of her book. Please join me in warmly welcoming Juliette Aristides.
Thanks, Jenna, BIMA, and friends for being here. It's exciting to get a chance to talk about my new book, and I have a couple celebrities in the audience. One is my editor, Laura Burt, if you would want to raise your hand so people can see you. She was instrumental. So this book is really, it sounds hyperbolic to say the work of a lifetime, but it really is. So here's a copy right here with the cover. And the impetus for the book really came out of being a kid and looking around and not quite fitting in the world as I saw it. One of, behaving, sitting in class, doing well in school, and this kind of trajectory that's supposed to happen. And I found that I got the most amount of feeling of belonging from a pencil, a paper, the books around me, and just being outside. And I have a feeling that if you're sitting here, you probably have a little bit of artist in you and can relate to that feeling. And so for me, art was kind of following a sound that nobody could hear but me, but perhaps all artists in their own way hear it. In fact, I would bet money on it. And writers and poets. And in fact, if you have ever read how many writers, people like Joseph Conrad or George Eliot or, Orwell and others got their start with writing, you'll find that it often started with looking. And where conversations are kind of taking place around them, they find themselves noticing details of light coming through a window or the sound of voices. And in fact, when Hemingway wrote his book about how to be a writer, he said, one piece of advice that he gave was, notice when the fishing line goes into the water if you're on a fishing trip, and the way that the water beads across the line, be able to recount that when you get home. And so really there's a lot of crossover between looking and seeing, but the one thing that kind of ties it all together, perhaps in a way, is one of attention. If you're not paying attention, you just don't see it. And in a way, that idea of artist as observer, you have to be just half a step behind the conversation to be noticing all these things. And so at any rate, my journey into art started from that place of just kind of curiosity, what brings me alive inside, where do I feel at home? And it led me to drawing. The study of drawing when I was a kid was called learning to see. I don't know if anyone else went to school in the age where they called learning to draw learning to see, because you actually trained your eyes almost to a different frequency. And how it kind of works is that when we look at things, we see them instantaneously. We look, we see, we understand, we slap a word on it. And so we're only seeing this kind of hybrid word picture, so to speak. It's how kind of language works. It helps us function in the world. But it also serves at the same time, it's a bridge, but it also serves as an obstacle to seeing in some way. So learning to see as a draftsman when you're beginning to draw is you take something that's fluid, instantaneous, and you begin to break it down into the language of lines and shapes and pattern. And it's slow and awkward. It's interesting because there's a whole strand of writers and essayists and photographers that then become draftsmen. And I think what calls them to learn to draw when they're so good at another medium is that it's this kind of open inquiry. So many great discoveries have been found by people who are more interested in the question than in the answer. And drawing has a way of tripping us up and slowing us down and causing us to think, why? Why did my hand make that mark when it was supposed to make a different mark? Wow, I never really quite noticed how the angle went this way rather than that way. And if you think about it, we can identify what something is 1/100th of a millisecond in. It's that fast, it's instantaneous. And any kind of drawing at all will slow you down to a complete standstill. There's a great Polish poet, Szymborska, and hopefully that's pronounced remotely okay. And she gave an address when she got the Nobel Prize for poetry and said that the reason she's there is because she said, I don't know. And the words, I don't know, led her to incredible discoveries. And she said that's something that everyone that made it to receive a Nobel Prize in any subject is, I don't know, leading to bigger answers, where everyone else, perhaps who does know, they walk out with what they came in with, which is answers. Anyway, I trained for many years. I moved all over from New York City, Philadelphia, Minneapolis, trying to figure out how to draw. And at the time in which I was studying, it wasn't so easy to be able to get that kind of education. And I ended up finding it in what's called Atelier education, which is basically studio training. It's kind of a fancy way for saying you find an artist that you like and you study under them, one skill at a time, getting gradually a little bit better no matter how long it takes. And I enjoyed that process of sitting around the table with artists, learning how to get a little bit better and continuing to explore. And art is one of those big subjects that it's got an easy on-ramp, but there's so many tendrils that go out from it that you can be studying any of them until the day you die and never reach the end of it. There's just no way to follow all paths. And so it's really worthy of our attention. And, you can have 15 students sitting around that table and all 15 can get the same start. And when they go off, will make totally different contributions to the world of seeing in art because of who they are, their temperament. So really art training, at least this kind of art training, is a language. It enables you to connect back and it enables you to connect out. So at any rate, I opened up the first atelier in the Northwest in the year 2000. It was like 99, 2000. And the book that I wrote really comes out of the fact that the technique of art was only one of the conversations that we were having. There was a lot of why and how does this connect to what we're doing now, and does it connect to contemporary life, what way? So at any rate, we did that, and it was marvelous. I still have so many close friends, some here, who were an important part of those years. And there's something about the physical act of making something that has an important part of all our lives. We live in the world, we take in knowledge through the senses. Being able to touch it, taste it, it's exhilarating. So the environment we find ourselves in is kind of different from the environment in which I started my training in, which, no, this is not it. I was not around that. This is a photograph from 1910, I think. So if we start off kind of the premise that drawing and art is about seeing and cultivating a sense of sight with the aim of helping us experience our lives more deeply, I would say, and other people's art through their eyes more deeply. The media environment, or the environment in which we find ourselves in, just in general, plays a role. So how does this picture of Times Square, New York City, differ from today's picture of Times Square, New York City? Don't make me call on you, Michael, just kind of throw it out. Yeah, it's definitely tamer. The world around the turn of that century was more text-based than image-based. And art predates civilization. It's really the dawn of what it means to be a human being, is where you find fine art. It takes many millennia later till you find something like the new technology of a book and learning to read. But this is really a golden age of literacy and images. For much of human history, you wouldn't see pictures of yourself. You would see yourself in a still pool or in a mirror of, polished metal or something like that. But you're not going to, we're perhaps tens of thousands of years away from a selfie. So if we look at Times Square now, we see a few more differences, and perhaps these two images in conjunction with one another kind of show you where art finds itself in competition, perhaps with other forms of imagery and image making. A lot is coming at us. And so before this, if you imagine, information would reach you at perhaps the speed, of a horse and rider, a boat, a train, and a long time before it becomes instantaneous. So that being said, we project further still, and we find ourselves each in our own, perhaps, world of specific images. There's a book called Alone Together. We perhaps find ourselves, to some degree, alone together. And we kind of use technology as if it's free and there's no cost. And of course, once you buy your cell phone and you get your Verizon provider, there perhaps isn't a cost. But Thoreau, sitting by his pond, looking into the future through his, telephoto lens, might say to us that there is a cost, and the true price of anything is the amount of our lives we exchange for it. So if we think of it in terms of that, perhaps often the cost of modern life is a little expensive, really. We don't have all that long here. And this is a picture I took on a walk through the woods. I love, I'm from Pennsylvania, but I love the woods here. And this is over on the Hood Canal. And I've got a lot of favorite parks up in Seattle, like Carkeek Park. I mean, we're so lucky to be in a part of the world where 5 steps outside of a parking lot, you can find yourself often not far from a place like this. And so if we consider the difference between this image and perhaps the one of our virtual reality things or our phone or whatever it is, this is a remarkable absence of information. Things happen a little bit slower, but what gets a chance to emerge when we are not getting stimulated from the outside? What kind of gets a chance to rise up? Perhaps a little bit of, slow appreciation, maybe a little boredom, maybe we're a little squirrely. We begin to notice, and perhaps the person next to us is taking a picture of something very different from what we're looking at. A sense of perhaps original thought, a feeling of excitement where we see something particularly beautiful, our own take on the world, a chance to ruminate about things, and kind of, in short, begin to develop a point of view, maybe even a strong one, about how we're feeling about things. And so I like to think of walks through the woods like that as inspiring great art from the past. Perhaps Stanford Gifford and many others would have walked along the same roads that I have, and inspired many artists and writers to pick up a brush and just take a stab at it in hopes of conveying the same feeling that they felt to other people, essentially saying, hey, look at this, look what I saw, isn't this amazing? And getting a chance to, for those of us that look at it, if you're in the presence of great art, we come back to our own lives a little bit different, a little changed. Hey, wait, I saw that in a Gifford painting, perhaps. And I was reading an op-ed piece, a couple months ago, and I read this line, and I thought it was marvelous. It's a great underappreciated talent to be seized. And it was really good, and it's true. That's if you want to point to, a commonality among all great works of art, perhaps any work of art is being seized. And the quote goes on, but he says, most of our great journeys begin with a surprise. And I didn't put this in, but he says, our selves are always found in the deepest enchantment that you can experience. The audio fellow here, Cole, has on his desk a Tolkien quote that could have been straight out of Tolkien, a great journey, caused by this. And so really this book came from all the years of sitting around the studio, talking about art and finding an opening for ourselves, perhaps to, what happens in these quiet places. And so I'm just going to read you a few lines, and then we're going to have a conversation. Jenna and I are going to have a conversation about it. I hope I have her glasses here. And I'm not going to read to you too much, but it starts off with a Thoreau quote. We live but a fraction of our life. Why do we not let on the flood? Employ your senses. And in fact, just before I get to reading, Joseph Campbell said that, he was quoting William Blake and said that if the doors of perception were cleansed, we would see life as it is, infinite. And so what are the portals of perception? The portals of perception are our eyes and our nose, our ability to hear, and what we taste, how we experience the world. And he's saying if those were cleansed, we would have such a big view of the world. So at any rate, I start off saying, artificial intelligence could write this book for me by the time I drink a cup of coffee, or make a cup of coffee, an instant cup of coffee, perhaps. I'll just add that in. Yet it's taken me my whole life to say these words. I could also have someone live my life for me and wake me up when it's over. But I choose to live my own life, think my own thoughts, and make my own mistakes. I'm now a citizen of two worlds, the real physical one and the digitally mediated. You could say I'm living in the interdigital age. There's a strong case to be made for developing the parts of ourselves that lead nowhere in particular. After all, the laws of movement in nature are curved, not linear. The seasons loop in perpetual motion, just like the planets and just like the hours of a day. Yet we strain against that limitation. We want to go forward and not around. Yet there's no quick way to enlarge a soul. You are the true subject of your art. We only become worthy of our calling by following it. How do you become an artist? Choose to be one and never stop. You don't need anyone's permission but your own. This is messy, so love the mess if you can. In the true spirit of growth, let's waste a little time and embrace all that makes us human on the way. And so the last paragraph is really a call to artists, because I feel like you are ambassadors to the world of a different kind of life, kind of one where the priorities are a little bit different. So, artists, your path to mastery is not a straight one, and it can't be rushed. It's exactly the length and duration it needs to be. You're following a sound that only you can hear to wherever it may lead. And through you, we learn there's more to life than we can see with our eyes, things that cannot be bought but only experienced. And through you, we experience a re-enchantment of the world. So, all right, thank you.
I'll just start with your chapter beginnings. So in your chapter beginnings, you describe sneaking out at night and writing and sketching in diners. How do you see those early moments of curiosity and solitude shaping the artist you became?
Yeah, we're all born in the time in which we live, so it's hard to imagine if life was a different way. But I'm really grateful for the times when nothing happened, because it showed me that there's a lot to our inklings, like that feeling where you can't quite, you're not sure it's going to lead anywhere. It's just a sense about something. And I found when creating this book, it was like years of thinking, I think there's something there. I don't quite know how to put it into words. And part of that sneaking out with a notebook saying, I don't know, I feel like I just need a couple hours, a couple days, and kind of really following the thread became this mental picture for me, because you don't quite know where it's leading, and you're never quite sure it's leading anywhere, but find that it often did. And so those moments of being in a diner where all of a sudden the thought kind of landed home, and I was like, yes, I've got it. There's something there. I could almost see it, and now I've got it. Really taught me, and I'm sure for many artists, the same thing, to trust those instincts. And if the minute you get bored, there's another way out, I don't know if I would have ever waited that long so that's essentially.
You write beautifully about imitation as a path to originality. Could you share an example of a teacher, artist, or even a work of art that has most deeply shaped your own practice and creativity?
Yeah, imitation is a great thing. That's also underrated, the sense that we have to be born an original force, and just know that we're historically unique in thinking of that as the path for the artist. At no point in human history was that a thing, really. We learned by watching the people around us often, or always. We still do in many ways. So I learned how to be an artist by watching other artists. Just get up, go into the studio and working. And everything from doing master copy drawings, where all of a sudden I found my hand being able to do something I couldn't normally do, was one. Yeah.
Was there ever an influence that you had to unlearn?
Yes, actually one of my greatest teaching influences I learned from and had to unlearn from, because it was really from the school of thought that if nobody was crying in the classroom, you weren't teaching right. That sense that if you really wanted to be an artist, it really had to hurt. And so you would really operated from the sense that the only person worth encouraging was a person who couldn't be discouraged. And so I really went into teaching thinking that's what it looked like. And over time realizing, no, that doesn't sit well with me, even to the point that I don't care that much about the product anymore. I care a lot more about the person, because the person has an incredible trajectory and you're only ever seeing part of it. And I'm 25 years into teaching, and so I've seen every single time someone stays with it, they land somewhere unexpected.
And speaking of encouragement, how do you encourage your students to find mentors without losing their own voice, or before they've even found their own artistic voice?
Yeah, if you think of it this way, there's always this balance between skill and mastery and your original voice. So if we imagine that every single one of you, I wish we had time, but if I asked you, how did you know you were going to be an artist, or what's the first time you remember really seeing something beautiful? It was a long, long time ago. Nobody just shows up wanting to be an artist 30, when at later points in life, without it having a very early origin story. And so you never forget when you're studying under someone or you're studying after somebody's work that you chose this. This is your story, and that keeps things oriented very clearly. And so if you imagine the desire to be very skillful on one side, you say, okay, Da Vinci, I think he was the greatest artist who ever lived. I want to be Da Vinci. Well, then you will be studying technical training till you die, and that's all you're going to do. Now, keep in mind that you can still make a really great contribution that way. It's not going to be 100% original voice. You're going to be, following that path. And if you look at the other side of it, where you want to explore your imagination, if you never quite learn the skill, it's a conversation, it's a language spoken by one that may or may not reach a wider audience. So you're always kind of balancing between, when choosing a mentor and how long to keep that, between your goal, between skill and imagination, and there's no perfect landing place ever. You just do the best you can.
Discernment.
Discernment.
Yeah. So in the Art of Illusion chapter, you explore how much of seeing is really about attention. How do you personally cultivate attention in our distraction-saturated world?
For me, cultivating attention is mostly gatekeeping what I'm reading, talking about, listening to. Try to not allow a lot of clutter in. And if you are pretty disciplined about doing that, you will be there'll be moments of boredom, but it will lead to attention where you choose it. And then you'll find it actually opens a lot of space for really interesting things. So cultivating attention would be, I would say, also, again, discernment.
Do you have a daily ritual or a habit that helps you sharpen that attention?
I have a whole lot of things. The act of drawing and trying to be really right with it is, that does one thing. I read a bunch of poetry. I study philosophy. I try to have real conversations as often as I can. And I think all those things help. I could really go on with that. Appreciate looking at next to nothing for long periods of time, which is like watching a movie with no music and no dialogue. Imagine that for like 15 minutes. You're like, oh my God. But things emerge. You'd be surprised.
Can you share an example of a moment where kind of shifting perception changed the way you painted?
Where attention, yes, I think everybody who has studied art, it's a whole world that exists that we simply do not see. Like when I was studying color, I didn't see a whole bandwidth of color. Literally, I would have gone my whole life and never noticed it existed. The study of halftone and form, people who are not artists do not need to know that exists, and you just don't see it. And so there's so many things in art and art training where you're like, you don't see it, and then you do see it. You're like, and then you never really unsee it. It's not like it's there all the time, but you have to kind of lock in. It's almost, with art, that C.S. Lewis, the wardrobe in the back, that's real. Finding a wardrobe in the back of things is real, I'd say.
So in the Labyrinth chapter, it suggests that that struggle and disorientation aren't obstacles to creativity, but the path itself. What's been one of your most challenging labyrinth moments, and how did it ultimately feed your art?
Geez. In the book, I kind of use this idea of the labyrinth. It's that metaphor has really survived millennia for so many reasons. In the dark, Theseus is following a thread in the dark, battling a minotaur. And it seems like a crazy exaggeration to say that that's an artistic life looks like that. But look, if you go to St. Mark's Cathedral at the U District, in Capitol Hill, they have a labyrinth. And all these, Chartres Cathedral, they have a labyrinth. Why? Because it's a great metaphor where life is difficult, art is difficult, it's a thing. And so if you have it in your mind that it's not easy, then you're less surprised, you're less likely to be batted off course when you encounter things. And for me, I don't want to kind of make light of like hardships that were overcome in art, but let's say that often the most mundane ones will have the power to really knock you out, like a disappointment or feeling like, in a way, Instagram or social media it doesn't necessarily help you because you just see everyone in the world who's already, they're already so good. And that could kind of show up as, well, who needs your voice in there? And that, if you think of that as, there's the Minotaur. He's there, he's kind of throwing that at you. So I would just say, sometimes it's not the grand battles, but the little ones that are hardest, the things that keep you from the easel.
In the Wayside Sacrament chapter, you talked about small, overlooked experiences of beauty. How can we, even as non-artists here, practice noticing the sublime in the ordinary?
Yeah, that's a true gift to be able to do that. But it's it's ours for the taking, really. That's where the gift, I would say, of artists comes in, because when you go to a museum and you're looking at like a Hammershøi's work and it's nothing but a kind of gray canvas and there's light coming through a window, and you say, I live in Seattle, I've got a window, it's gray light coming right through it. What makes his life any more distinctive than mine? It's like, oh, it's seeing it through his eyes. So the exposure to still life, to landscape painting, Michael does paintings, over freeway passes. I'll never walk over an overpass, like going to the light rail, walking over without thinking of his work. And because I've seen it, I know there's something there to be found. So your gift of what you see, when you turn it into art, becomes a big flag in the ground saying, look here, go home and look here. So that's what I'd say.
You describe weeping in front of ancient Buddhas during the early days of the pandemic. What role do you think art plays in sustaining us in times of crisis?
Art has a long focal point. Art's been around, the caves. We went, Izzy, to see that movie about the caves. What's that, 30, 40,000, work from 30 or 40,000 years ago. Art, the fact that people were making art in a time pre-civilization, there's no heat, there's no dental work, and you would say, how many things do we put art at the bottom of in our time? But there, getting salt was a big deal, having to get water was enormous, but yet art was as central to what it means to be a human being alive in the world, So for me, the fact to go to a museum and see a piece of art, knowing they lived through it, whatever it wasn't great, I can guarantee it, and they lived through it, and they left us something beautiful, kind of gives me courage that my job is to leave something beautiful at the end of it for somebody else.
In Home of the Muses, you describe museums as places of renewal, almost like modern temples where we can feed the soul. Since we're gathered here at BIMA today, what do you think is the role of museums today, and how can they continue to be spaces of inspiration?
Yeah, museums play an important role, and perhaps the easiest way to kind of think about that for me, and everybody who goes to a museum has different expectation, different experience, but I always think of museums with the word museum itself, which is home of the muses, with the idea that at one point museums were, they're kind of secular temples. This idea that if you come to a museum in the right headspace, you could be visited by these, I don't think the muses were goddesses necessarily, but spirits of inspiration that would visit you. You'd be like, aha, and walk out with something more than you came. And the muses are kind of interesting because they were the children of, like, the origin of the word muse itself as a concept is, from what I understand, Zeus created the heavens and earth and all, like, this is the Greek mythological origin story. And there was a lot of gods and goddesses sitting around, and he said, I've made all this, but something feels missing. Do you see anything that's missing? And everybody's thinking, what's missing is voices to praise creation. And the muses were born originally in Greek mythology as voices of praise to kind of remind everybody. And I feel like our time especially, and what time wouldn't this be appropriate to say, what's the goal of a human life? What's important here? Is our life one of total work, or is there a transcendental self? If there is a transcendental self, where would you find it? You might find it in the woods. You might also find it in the museum. That enables us to go back out and see it and kind of praise again. So that's what I would say. The museums are perhaps, some of the most important places that we have. Thanks, Jenna. These are great questions.
Thank you.
These are hard questions.
So I'd love to open it now to the audience. Please raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic so that we can get your questions recorded as well as Juliette's answers. So does anybody have any questions or comments for Juliette?
I'll get it.
Okay. Go ahead and
Me first?
Get him. Yeah.
I think Jenna's question to you was, what are disciplines maybe that you go, and you named having real conversations. Can you define real conversations for me?
Okay. I try multiple levels. I invite people for dinner a lot. I trade drawing lessons to a retired philosophy professor who I meet with, and we study great texts together. I read stuff online and I contact the people who wrote them to talk to me more in depth about what they've written. I have a lot of conversations through books. I have a stack of books, and at this point in my life, if I feel the inkling, this is important, I don't ask why anymore, even if it feels completely complete tangent. So for me, conversations take the place, virtually, in person. They're casual, they're formal, as much of it as I can, because I find that I enjoy my life more, by those things when I'm not actively painting it. So.
When you were in third grade, were you exceptionally talented?
It's really funny because I have a section in the book where I talk about being in third grade, and I was so hopeless. I think I was the only person in my whole school to fail a IQ test. I got the feeling I failed based on the conversations that happened subsequently to that test. And then not only that, I was told I could never be an artist because I couldn't spell it. There were so many obstacles that I navigated. No, not at all. In fact, in high school, it was the only class I got an F in. An F, we don't do E for could be excellent, E could be failing. It was F for failing when I was a kid. So...
Got one back here.
I guess first a comment. It strikes me that so much of what you are talking about is sort of the art of slowing down and really noticing and being present. And I just think that's an interesting contrast to everything that's happening in our world, and being present is a way to sort of ground yourself. And then secondly, I was just curious, a lot of the techniques I'm not an artist, but I do appreciate art and find those moments of beauty. A lot of the techniques you mentioned are sort of practices that people who want to enhance their spirituality practice as well. And I was just curious if there was any overlap or your thoughts on that.
There is, and I think when I set up my atelier, it really was with this sense of creating this monastic experience with art at the center of it. It does feel like it's a spiritual calling for me, kind of consecrated work in a way that there doesn't have to be a monetary aspect to feel like I'm absolutely following the path that I'm supposed to be on. And so I think for artists, we could be pulled in a lot of different directions in terms of, is your work important because of, a show, or you're being part of the art world or the art market, or there's a commodity associated with it. But I think art essentially as a practice of it being, a human alive in the world, and deep way has value in and of itself. And I feel like I'm squarely in that camp at this point in my life, or hope to be in that way. Thank you.
Do you think AI images can be art?
I would say that, no. I mean, I would say no, absolutely not. I don't, it's not, art is true art. It can be an image. I think we're going to end up, can you do interesting thing? I'd like to draw a distinction between art and images. We can do a ton with AI. We're just at the beginning of it, and it's going to, transform the culture. It's going to transform what we read and all those sorts of things. But for me, art will be linked, for my own personal definition, to a physical accomplishment in terms of a craft, and have to float through our imperfect senses and come out as a process between skill, vision, and statement. But that being said, there's going to be, would I be able to know where this is going to land 15 years? How could anybody know? So,
Thank you.
That last question sidetracked me. I wanted to make a comment about it, but my original question is, early on in thinking about art, I myself came across one or two books that really helped define how I thought of art. One was Philosophy of Dewey, of art.
John Dewey?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Art
He's
as
amazing.
Experience.
Yeah, that's a really good book.
The other was a book that always gets misunderstood when I state it, because the popular book everyone thinks I'm talking about is Art and Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, but it was actually a book called Zen in the Art of Archery.
I've read that. I know exactly what you're talking about.
So those two had a huge influence, and how I get sidetracked on how I relate that as a response to the AI question is that with me, those really focus on that part of the experience of creating art is in the experience of it. And AI right now feels, which I'm sure there could be challenges to this, but feels to me like it's much more, like one of the things in art, Zen and the Art of Archery, was the master chided the student, saying that those in the West are just interested in the bullseye and not on the journey to the bullseye. And that seems to me, at least with my own experience with playing with the AI image makers, is, it's image centric versus how did I get to make this image? But anyway, that got me sidetracked. My original question was there any books that have titles that have inspired you in your own development?
Yeah, there's so one quick thing dovetailing on that, one image well seen, one image that's really deeply, information is not the same as wisdom. And so we can have a ton of information and not quite have it land. So the same thing with images. More images aren't going to change the culture in a significant way. Deeply experienced image making and images that change us will in turn change a culture in that way. So yeah, to your point, and both those, yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts about the books that you mentioned, and yes, so many. I tend to have a book that I get very, very excited about, and it kind of life-changing. But I guess the early one, I wouldn't recommend it to you, but the one as a kid that I read in high school, my first philosophy book was Reveries of a Solitary Walker. And at the time, I spent a lot of time by myself out walking, and I saw that, and I was like, I'm not alone. I'm not an alien. This is speaking to me. And so books can be very, very good friends. And so, yeah, I really thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. And so, I guess we have time for one more, right? Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thank you. I just was curious how teaching has impacted your artistic journey and seeing the way that you see the world.
Yeah, teaching, I studied for 10 years full time, and I was so excited about things that I would, wake up at 4:30 in the morning sometimes just to be the first one in there, actually to beat this one guy who would always be the first one there. So I kept trying to get in there earlier to him. But I loved it. I loved every part of it, just this slow, it didn't matter how simple the skill was. And so for me, teaching is a chance to still be in school. And I learn from people all the time. Charles, sitting here, is in my atelier. I learned from Charles. I learned from Izzy, I still learn from our conversations. And so teaching is a way to never leave school for me. I enjoy it. I still, enjoy it so much. Thank you for that.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. Yeah, if anybody else would like to.
Hi, Juliette. Are there any works that you stumbled upon that took you back and you said, wow? And what were those? And were they like your work or very different than your work?
Yeah, the books, the works of art, I've got a bunch. There's some that, I don't know if you've experienced this, where you've seen it in books 100 times, and then you go to the museum. Did anyone see The Beheading of Lady Jane Grey by Delaroche? You see it in these books, and it's this tiny, and then go to the National Gallery in London, and it's the size of a wall. So some works have taken me back, or the Vermeer for an opposite reason. You think it's the size of the wall, and it's just this tiny. So, and then some works you expect to just knock you out, and you see it in person, and it's a one note thing. I have different seasons and different tastes for different seasons, and one of the works that is speaking to me right now are just simple drawings do not reproduce very well. They're almost like a person. When you go in, if you go to museums and you ask to go into their drawing rooms, they'll pull out Michelangelo drawings with no glass, and it will just be you and this drawing. And they're so delicate, not just his work, but people that are not really that famous, like Alphonse Legros' work, line drawings, and it's like having another, human being. You're like, oh my gosh, what's up? And then they're like, and if you took a picture and tried to show someone, their spirit is just a flat surface. And Legros has been speaking to me recently because he was a great, great draftsman doing the simplest drawing. And I felt like, who is a person who has this much humility that through their whole life they could be content with something so simple? And as I got to, I passed his work again and again and again, and then all of a sudden it's like a person that you've seen 100 times, and then you're like, who are you? There's something to you. And so those kind of works are my favorite in a way. So yeah, thank you. It's such good questions. Thanks everybody for being here. It was just a ton of fun. And thank you, Jenna and Cole and everybody at BIMA for being here today.